Hello everybody, I'm Linguafoliax, and Borderlands 2 is my third favourite first-person shooter of all time. Zero is the best, his dialogue is kick-ass, and I love him so. However, my absolute favourite first-person shooter of all time is The Witness, which may or may not be surprising to you if you've ever played the game before. My second favourite first-person shooter is Portal 2, by the way, just in case you were curious. But without going into too many spoilers, The Witness is a game where you are placed alone on a beautiful island, and literally the only thing you do throughout the whole game is solve puzzles. What makes The Witness cool, however, is that almost nothing is ever explained to you verbally or explicitly, and there isn't really a strict order in which you need to solve all the puzzles, unless it's been set out that way for a specific section, but generally you can solve all the puzzles in any order you want, and the way in which you go about solving the puzzles is by observing the clues around you and by learning new things through context. Context is a very important thing with any form of communication, and it is absolutely crucial to have a good understanding of context in order to use the words in your target language properly. I finished the last video off with the general question of, if you've never learned a language before, where do you even start? And I was actually struggling a bit to come up with a helpful answer to this question, because the fact of the matter is, where you start is going to be different depending on who you are and how you learn, and also depending on the language you've chosen to focus on. For example, the reason I got into Icelandic was entirely because of the Polar Express. Yes, seriously. When I was a kid, I had the habit of randomly changing the language settings on all the DVDs we rented, because DVD stores were still a thing back then, and I would listen to the same movie over and over again in the different languages that were available. And fun fact about the Polar Express movie is that the only other language dub available on the DVD was in Icelandic. I have no idea why, it just was, and I immediately got excited about that, of course, because it was a language I had never heard before, and when I read the subtitles, it also had a bunch of weird letters I had never seen before either. And because I knew the plot of the whole movie, and I'm very good at remembering dialogue, in fact I usually quote movies back to myself whenever I'm randomly thinking of one.
Pull the lever, Kronk.
That meant that I had picked up quite a bit of new vocabulary just from that movie alone. The movie also filled me with all kinds of fantastical aspirations of moving to Iceland and experiencing winter around Christmas for the first time, which I did eventually do, but that's probably a story I'll have to say for another time. My point is, I was able to remember Icelandic words because I had a context readily available in front of me, and I was able to hear and read all of the relevant words and phrases that the characters were saying in those contexts. Context is in fact so much a part of language and communication that the structure and lexicon of a language itself is constantly influenced by the environment the language has been used in and the history of the people who speak it. Which means that learning about another language also tells you a lot about the country that language comes from and the environment of the people who live there. This is something that became extremely clear to me when I started looking into Yagara language. Now, before I continue, I feel like I should make a couple of disclaimers here. Firstly, I'm going to be using the name Yagara to refer to the related languages and dialects traditionally spoken by Indigenous Australians of Brisbane, Ipswich and the surrounding areas. Different peoples may use different names for their languages, countries and cultural identities, but I'm going to be saying Yagara here just for simplicity's sake. Secondly, because there is no official standard written form of the language yet and there are not many active speakers of the language at present, the words I will be using for this section are my own reconstructions of these terms based on my own private research into the language. And finally, because this is an oppressed minority language, and this may be the first time you're hearing about this language at all, please take everything I say here with a huge grain of salt. There is no way to fully capture the complexity of a single language in less than a minute, so please keep in mind that this is an overgeneralization. All this is basically to say that if you want to learn more about any language at all, you should always seek out the people who own and use that language, not some rando foreigner on YouTube. So anyway, with all that in mind, learning about Yagara language made me a lot more aware of the country I was living in and the environment the language originates from. For example, I now know that there are two different kinds of native stingless bees, Gabai and Guta, the latter of which was traditionally harvested on Mount Kutha, which is literally what the mountain is named after. I now know that this is a storm bird, or the Koel cuckoo, and it's called a duwang because of the sound the bird makes around stormy weather. and that it's also what the suburb Toowong is named after. I now know that the most distinguishing feature about the black swan is not in fact its black feathers, but its red beak, because it is called Moruti, from Muru and Gutin. Additionally, it's also what Maroochydore is named after. I know that there are so many different kinds of native trees because they each have their own individual names. This is a Bonye, this is a Biki, this is a Guran, this is a Mei, and this is a Burakain, which you definitely want to avoid touching, and this is a Diura, but its bark is called Gundu, which also means canoe because this is the kind of tree that canoes are made out of. Before I learnt any of these words, I never even noticed these things before, nor did I even think those things mattered in any way, which just goes to show how lacking our education about First Nations cultures still is. But the main point I'm trying to make here is that the environment has a massive effect on the way a language manifests, because the things that people talk about are usually going to be the things that are constantly around them all the time, which means that you will come across many words in other languages that don't have a very good one-to-one translation with words in your native language. By the way, this is a very common thing I see so many people misunderstand about bilingualism and speaking another language, this idea that you will automatically be good at translating things. Being bilingual does not mean that you will be a good translator, because translation means that you have to constantly think about the similarities and differences between both languages simultaneously and then switch from one to the other. It's a very specific skill. But when I'm learning new words in a new language, I'm not thinking about how to translate it. I'm not trying to connect the new words back to the English words, I'm connecting them to what the words mean. When I'm learning Hindi, I'm not trying to connect the words Billy, Kutta and Bakshi to cat, dog and bird, I'm connecting them to their concepts. I'm connecting them to what they mean. The word Billy doesn't mean cat. Billy means, well, it means this. It means Billy. If I'm speaking Hindi with someone and I see that thing over there, I call it Billy. And if there's more than one of them, I call them Billiya. And the word may also change forms depending on its grammatical role in the sentence, because that's the way Hindi works, but the point is, I'm not trying to translate it back into English. I'm not even thinking about English at that point. The key to learning another language does not lie within the language itself or between different languages. It lies in reality, in the world around you.
Whether we like it or not, we are now part of the web of interconnected events that surround this case. We must provoke a reaction from the other elements.
Where are you right now? What are you doing right now? What things can you see around you? Where do you go to school? What do you do at work or at home? What places do you frequently go to, and what do you do there? What sorts of things do you usually see there? If you want to learn a language and you don't know where to start, the best place to start is by developing your own linguistic landscape, so that you can choose words that are relevant to you. Just like The Witness, the answers are right in front of you. After taking 15 minutes here to sketch my own bedroom up, I've drawn my bed with a pillow and bed sheets, my bedroom door and window, my bookshelf, my work desk and my bedside desk, my clothes rack, and my dirty laundry basket. Around all of those places I've also drawn a hat, a shirt, some pants, a pair of socks, the hairbrush I left on my bed, my desk lamp, my laptop, a computer mouse, a coffee cup with a teaspoon, a bucket with a pencil, a pen, a whiteboard marker and an eraser, a box full of dice, and my headphones. That's already a lot of things to work with. So now that I have a context readily available for me, I can look up a bunch of Hindi nouns to refer to the things in the picture, or a bunch of Hindi adjectives to describe the qualities of those things, or a bunch of Hindi verbs to express what is commonly done to those things or with those things. And after I look them up and have written them on the sketch that I've drawn out, I'll be able to remember those words because they are relevant to the context, and I'll be able to practice those words because they are things that are constantly around me. And after that stuff has become ingrained in my linguistic world, I'll then be able to build off of that knowledge that I've already learnt. And of course, there's no limit to what landscapes you can build for yourself. You can also draw up the kitchen or the bathroom or the driveway or the local cafe or your workplace or your school classroom, just as long as the things you draw are relevant to their contexts and they're things that you usually see there all the time so that you'll be able to practice them later. So why don't you try this out for a while and let me know how it goes in the comments below. And if you have any other ideas that you think you can add to this strategy, then again, don't forget to put it in the comments below. And while you're at it, you might as well like the video and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified of new uploads. Thank you all for listening, and we'll speak again next time. Or the driveway, or the local cafe, or your workplace, or the school bathroom. Classroom. School bathroom, why would you do that? Probably don't do that.
Do we even have that lever?